I'm a historian. I study some of the worst mass murderers in history. I have a difficult question for you. How different are we from those who commit crimes against humanity in history? Now, I realize most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about murderous tyrants of the past. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong. Individuals responsible for millions upon millions of deaths. Unimaginable suffering. If we do think about such dictators, we might imagine them as inhuman, as literal monsters, nothing like ourselves. But such people, such individuals were and are every bit as human as us. It makes sense that we want to view them completely apart from ourselves, individuals with whom we have nothing in common, only evil incarnate. But to do that is to reject the shared humanity of individuals, and in doing so, we close ourselves off from the reality that we too can become radicalized by political ideals. We as well can find ourselves doing horrible things or being a part of terrible causes, which we might fundamentally somehow believe are right at the same time. In an era of growing political polarization, recognize that monsters, they aren't real. They don't actually exist. It's human beings who commit crimes against humanity. Grapple with the humanity of inhumanity. We can all find ourselves believing in causes, questions of fundamental right and wrong, justice and injustice, and those causes can help give meaning to our existence. The danger is when we become radicalized by our ideals, when we become so convinced of our vision of justice that we are willing to do anything to see our ideological ends prevail, even if it means dehumanizing others who we perceive to be in our way, to view them as less than human. Remember, some of the worst things that have ever happened were not done by evil dictators believing they were doing terrible things. They were done by evil dictators believing they were doing something fundamentally right. Here's a reality in that regard that will forever haunt me and disturb me at my core. That Adolf Hitler and the leadership of Nazi Germany believed the Holocaust, the murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, that this was right. That history would understand and ultimately applaud their actions. Hitler, from his own perspective, was not a villain. He viewed himself as a courageous savior for the German people and the world. The same type of nonsensical drivel that has defined murderous tyrants for time immemorial. Ah, yes, but I'm different. You might say to yourself in this moment, I'm not a murderous dictator. I could never have people killed for a cause I believe in or become a part of that cause. Doesn't even the suggestion that that could be true demonstrate that I don't understand the uniquely vile nature of such individuals? That I am totally out of touch with the nuances of mental illness and mental pathology that could create such individuals? I hear you. I've thought about as much at great length. But that reasoning, that is the first step to becoming like tyrants in history, who never thought that they themselves were the villains. It's the conviction that we're somehow above everything awful and immoral that happens. Evil is not something that happens here or here. It happens over there. That I could never lose sight of right and wrong, of basic ethics, amid a struggle for my vision of justice on which I cannot negotiate. I can never find myself making those small compromises to further my ideological ends that might, just maybe, find me on the wrong side of history. To distance ourselves from mass murderers by suggesting that they're simply inhuman is to suggest we have nothing to learn from their humanity. It's to ignore a warning. And that warning is not so much about Hitler, Stalin, and Mao as it is about us. Step back, see a wide spectrum of human behavior in which we are all, under the right circumstances and to varying degrees, absolutely capable of becoming a part of a cause that does terrible things, justifies violent acts for larger ideological ends, the highest of which can and does reach crimes against humanity. When we begin to dehumanize other people, suggest that our version of morality doesn't happen to apply to them, that it would be easier if they simply weren't in the way for justice. Oh yes, you can begin to lose your way. So come to terms with crimes against humanity as explicable human behavior. Throughout the process of writing my book, Before Evil, I spent years studying the formative life events of some of the worst tyrants who ever lived. What I found in my research was not the story so much of monsters in the making, but of relatively ordinary kids. And I was struck by the determination that any discussion of mankind's brutality has to begin with our shared humanity, what we fundamentally have in common. That we are born, we grow up and go through puberty, we fall in love, we experience loss, and we grapple with the reality that we too will die someday. Monsters aren't real. We are. The young man before you is Vladimir Ulyanov. You might better know him as Vladimir Lenin. You may assume that Lenin, who led the Bolshevik Revolution in October 1917 to create the world's first communist state, who in a civil war would be part of a regime and lead a new state that would commit crimes against humanity in a conflict that would kill 13 million people. You might assume that Lenin came from an abusive childhood, as some mass murderers in history have. That wasn't the case at all. Lenin came from a lovely home with a good mom and dad. He experienced tragedies in his adolescence, yes. His father died young. His brother would be hanged by the Tsarist regime. But there was absolutely nothing from his earliest years that suggested he was going to go on to be a mass murderer. Note, a loving home, the most earnest of good parenting, does not preclude a child's later ideological radicalization and commitment to violence as a tool for change. Note as well, a bad childhood, trauma, and abuse by no means destines somebody for tyranny. Quite to the contrary. As a child, young Lenin enjoyed Christmas trees and painted Easter eggs. He went sledding in the winter. In the summer, he went swimming. Throughout the course of his childhood, he was an extraordinary student. He fell in love with learning, straight A's, finished first in his high school class. It was during his time as a teenager, though, that Lenin began to read widely about political ideology, about ideals. He fell in love with Marxism and the recognition for him that the future of this world is a communist utopia, a world without rich and poor, a world without class injustice. And Lenin came to the conviction as a young man that one had to struggle for this cause to help bring it about one day sooner. That was the measure of your morality. Will you stand up to the oppressors of humanity? So how did we get from these ideals of youth to mass murder? When the Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917, Lenin found himself at the forefront of the struggle he'd always dreamed about leading. But by the summer of 1918, the Bolsheviks were on the edge of the abyss. Provinces throughout Russia rebelled against Bolshevik rule. Lenin did not hesitate, not for an instant, to order the most grisly of acts to perpetuate what he saw as a coming utopia. To his comrades in one province, he wrote the following that summer, quote, "Comrades, the insurrection must be pitilessly suppressed. Hang, absolutely hang in full view of the people, 100 known rich peasants, fat cats, bloodsuckers. Do it in such a way that for hundreds of miles around, the people will see, know, tremble, shout. The blood-sucking rich peasants are being strangled and will be strangled. Telegraph receipt and implementation. Yours, Lenin. P.S. Fine harder people." For Lenin, this was not unimaginably cruel. It was a matter of course. All governments have people killed during wartime. And for Lenin, the measure, again, of your morality is your willingness to participate. Are you to be so soft on your ideals that you're not willing to do whatever it takes to achieve them? At that moment, are you going to back down? Mass murder followed for individuals that Lenin thought there could be no neutrality. There could be no silence. This was not complicity. This was treason against fundamental justice. You could come along and carry a rifle, be part of the struggle, or to the wall. These were the stakes to Lenin. Note, in the mass murder that followed, it wasn't always sadists and psychopaths who do the killing. Far from it. Oftentimes, it's ordinary people believing this is disturbing, but we must do what we must do for the larger cause. And then they found themselves holding a noose. Let's look at an example from China. May 1966, Mao Zedong, the leader of the Communist People's Republic of China, launched the Cultural Revolution to destroy his political enemies. Mao urged young people in particular to rise up against counter-revolutionary authority. In other words, anybody who might impede or oppose Mao Zedong's will. Frenzied adolescents across China donned military uniforms, began to call themselves Red Guards, and attacked anybody they thought was on this wrong side of history. Anarchy erupted throughout China. Young people, students in particular, began to attack teachers and administrators. On August 5th, 1966, high school girls at an elite Beijing institution beat their vice principal to death with a nail-spiked club. At a middle school, weeks later, kids poured boiling water on their principal. It was not insane kids who did this. It was not kids who delighted in evil for evil's sake necessarily. These were adolescents caught up in the thrall of a cause for a leader they worshiped like a god and that they were convinced fundamentally was right. Enter Song Binbin. Song was the nominal leader of the Red Guard unit at the high school where they beat the vice principal to death. She was welcomed on stage at a mass rally in September of 1966 and given the honor, as 1 million people were in the background, of pinning a Red Guard armband on the Chinese dictator. As she did so, Mao leaned into her and said, "Be martial." Song beamed, proud of what she had done, not capable of coming to terms with the horror of her actions for so many years to come. The point? Even our children, who we love earnestly and hope will make the world a better place, they're not necessarily immune from political radicalization and a commitment to violence as a tool of change in their lives. Be on guard, not only for dictators who can manipulate us into doing terrible things, but the fundamental conviction in ourselves to want to do something heroic and good. That's what helps make us susceptible to tyrants and demagogues in the first place. Extremism drives crimes against humanity. Convincing yourself otherwise by blaming bad childhoods or only blaming mental illness or some form of evil that we can never really get to because it's so inexplicable. It is to ignore the reality that we ourselves can be the monstrous. So watch for this in yourself today, tomorrow, all the days of the rest of your life. When you begin to dehumanize other people for a cause you care about, when you begin to blindly follow a leader, when you begin to believe it would just be easier if they weren't here. Oh yes, you can begin to become a part of something awful and justify terrible acts. But nothing is preordained. Be different. Encourage new generations to think about their actions through the lens of suffering that it causes or diminishes for other people. Strive to interpret the meaning of human experience, past and present, with compassion, even if it has also often been lacking in history and in our world. Courageous opposition is needed to confront tyranny, absolutely. But so is the recognition of everyone's shared humanity, even the worst among us, lest we become more like them. Fighting for what is right should never come before the kind of love and mercy which makes life worth living on this planet. It's on you.